Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the January 10th, 2022 meeting of the Planning Board for the Town of Chatham. My name is Catherine Halpern. I'm Chair of the Planning Board for the Town of Chatham. And this meeting is being conducted by remote participation only. And in a moment, I'll be giving you a few points about that. I do need to ask if anyone is recording the meeting. It is all right to record the meeting, but you do need to notify us. I'll give you a few seconds in case you're muted. All right, I'll go ahead. This meeting is being recorded and will be available shortly hereafter for scheduled and on-demand viewing on any smartphone or tablet device. And let me just go right in to some points about the remote participation. This meeting of the Chatham Planning Board is being conducted via remote participation only in accordance with Section 20 of Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021 and shall afford adequate alternative means of public access via Microsoft Teams or by calling the phone number 1-508-945-4410. That's 1-508-945-4410. And the conference ID number is 868-959-73#. That's 868-959-73#. And as I mentioned, you can also join the meeting online using Microsoft Teams by using the link that is on the agenda that's posted on the town website. Despite our best efforts, we may not be able to provide for real-time access. And as I mentioned, we will post a record of this meeting on the town's website as soon as possible. And I'll just mention that in accordance with town policy, the public can speak to any issue or hearing or business item on the agenda during the meeting when recognized by the chair. And now just to go on to certain specifics of procedures for remote participation, I will begin with a roll call of all planning board members. And as I mentioned, that after an agenda item discussed by the planning board, I'll open up the floor to questions or comments from citizens or non-board members, and you may speak when the chair recognizes you. We do need to have just one speaker at a time, and that's the person recognized by the chair. For those of you who are non-board members, members of the public, when you are recognized to speak, would you kindly repeat your name? And also, if you're connected by phone, please repeat the last 4 digits of your phone number. It's just really important that we can identify all speakers very clearly. Also during this meeting, the planning board, if we take any votes, all votes will be taken by roll call vote. And at the end of the meeting, we'll close the meeting with a verbal confirmation of adjournment and we'll note the time of adjournment. So let's begin with our roll call of planning board members. And also I should mention, I'm sorry, if you're not the recognized speaker, would you kindly mute your telephone or mute the audio on your computer? And if you are connected by computer, would you kindly disable your video if you are not the speaker? That's with the exception of planning board members. Planning board members, kindly mute your microphones, but do leave your videos on. It would be good for planning board members to leave your videos on. So let's do our roll call of the planning board members. Art Sprue, are you present?
Art Sprue, present.
Thank you. Tom Gagan, are you present? Tom Gagan, you may be muted. We did see you here.
There he is.
Tom
Gagan present.
Thank you, Tom. And Warren Chain, present?
Warren Chain, present.
And Bob Wirtschafter?
Bob Wirtschafter, present.
Bob Dubus, are you present?
Bob Dubus, present.
Thank you. And we do understand that Roger Griffin is not able to join us tonight. And this is Catherine Halpern, and I am also present. So before we begin with our agenda points. May I ask if any board member needs to recuse themselves from any item on our agenda this evening?
Bob Dubus, I have to recuse myself on, let's see, 879 Crow Road.
Okay, thank you, Bob. So when we discuss that, you should mute yourself and turn off your video and kind of disconnect from the call, and we won't have you participate in that discussion. Thank you.
You mean
So
279 Crowell Road, Bob? Or 878 Main Street, because
No,
we don't have it.
279 Crow Road.
Okay, thank you.
okay, thanks, Bob. Thanks for the clarifications. All right, so let's go to our first agenda item. That being said, and that's the minutes from December 13th. May I just ask if any board members have any corrections, additions, amendments to the minutes? I'll give you a few moments in case you're muted. If there are no corrections or additions, could I ask for a motion to approve the minutes as submitted?
Motion, I move to accept the minutes as submitted.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Art Spru, I second it.
Thank you. Let's do a roll call vote. Art Spru,
Art Spru, approve.
Tom Gay,
Tom Gagan, approve.
Warren Chain,
Warren Chain, approve.
Bob Dubus.
Bob Dubus abstain.
Okay. And Bob Wirtschafter.
Bob Wirtschafter, approve.
Thank you. And I also approve. Thank you. We can just note that Bob Dubus abstained because he was absent from that meeting. Thank you, Bob. All right, next item on the agenda is the release of covenant bond statement of conditions, and this is for 279 Kroll Road. Bob Dubus has recused himself from this matter, but the other board members will go ahead. And we do have an update in the staff report. I'll just note that from Ally, we have looked at this. She did receive an as-built plan, which was included in your packets. It is dated December 21, 2021 for the shared right-of-way. However, the plan does not include the information regarding the new drainage infrastructure that was placed on the corner of Lot 1 that was installed to mitigate stormwater runoff. And also, staff has requested that that information be included on a new as-built plan. And also we have, just as to note again, continuing with the staff report, we have not yet received the review by DPW director, nor have we received the maintenance agreement. The nenext point on your staff report. The statement of conditions states that upon completion of the construction of the proposed 12-foot driveway, a 2-year maintenance agreement shall be executed and a maintenance bond of not less than $1,000 shall be provided to the town. And this also has not yet been submitted. So I am going to ask if there
Madam
is,
Chair,
yes, a
this
presenter,
is Bill-
President.
this is
Mr.
Bill
Riley.
Riley on behalf of the Carltons.
Yes, please go ahead, Mr. Riley.
So I've spoken with the engineers at Ryder and Wilcox, and they're collecting information about the drain structure that was located on the southern end of the property adjacent to Dr. Cole's property. And we hope to have that in time for your next meeting. I received the maintenance agreement form from Ally, very kindly, thank you. And that'll be executed and returned. Ally's gonna have to remind me what kind of, what form the funds are in. But we hope to have all this to you before your next meeting, which raises the big question, where's Tom Temple in his report?
Right. So I think one action, I'll just I'll ask the board for comments, but just in advance, I mean, I think one action that we could consider, that we should consider really, is to continue this matter until the board has received all the missing information that we've requested. And as you've said, Mr. Riley, all of that is in process. So that would be something that if we can agree with you that we could consider continuing the matter until we receive all necessary information. So with that being said, I'm just going to open it up to board comments or questions. Arthur, do you have any additional comments or questions?
Where the,
It's hard to hear you, Art. You might be still muted.
no, I'm not that I know.
Okay,
Can you hear me?
now, yes, now I can.
What I would like to also see on the as-built plan, on a catch basin.
It's a little, you're fading in and out. So, but I hear that you're requesting additional information on the as-built plan.
Right. There's a pipe that goes across between the catch basin and the infiltration basin, and you should have a pipe size and location and an invert on it. And if they could add that, that would be great.
Okay, good. Tom Gagan? Additional comments?
Madam Chair, I have no additional comments.
Thank you. Warren Chain?
This is Warren saying, yeah, just a couple of questions just to clarify my understanding here. The as-built that shows the drainage easement, that work was done prior to the photographs that were submitted to us by Dr. Cole after a rainstorm. That's my understanding. And that subsequent to that, work was done to add a drain upslope from the drainage easement catch basin. I just want to make sure that that is the case. And my question would really be, was it right? Who did the engineering for the catch basin as well as the drain? And has the town received all the necessary information to, or has it already received and approved the plans? So certainly my observation as a total bystander with no expertise in the field would note that the water that's in Dr. Cole's pictures certainly was unable to be absorbed by the drainage that's there, and the modest drain that was put upslope is quite modest and not necessarily even in the right place. But again, I'm not the one to judge that. I just wanted to have someone confirm my understanding of the sequence, that the drain that was added upslope was meant to solve the problem that was in Dr. Cole's pictures. And as the town engineer signed off on that as adequate for stormwater runoff control. If not, then I guess we need to wait for further information from the town engineer. I don't know who to address that to. I just was hoping someone could clarify my understanding.
Yeah, maybe, I think when we get Tom Temple's evaluation, that will answer those questions, but I'll just ask Ally about the time, to confirm the timeline of the photos. Ally, if you remember, the photos from Dr. Cole's, were those before or after? I think they were after.
I do believe that they were after, but
Yeah.
just to let you know the process of how, we review things when subdivisions come in. So when
Yeah.
subdivisions come in like this with the drainage easement area and also the catch basins and things that are actually in that driveway, We do request drainage calculations, which were received at the time, and our Natural Resources Department actually reviews those drainage calculations to make sure that they would be adequate to catch all the stormwater on that road area. This proposal is kind of a little bit more in depth though because of the topography that's located in this area. And so when we did realize that there was additional drainage that was coming off of the site onto Dr. Cole's property, that's when we had brought up potentially additional drainage, because we do have, the planning board at the time of subdivision did put a condition on that all stormwater has to stay on site. So that's kind of the sequence of events of how we got here. And I'm not sure if Bill wants to chime in a little bit more about that timeline.
Madam Chair, I would, because I think, first of all, the picture that that Neil Coles took was taken before the work in the street at Kroll Road was completed. That's obvious from the pictures because you can see the traffic cones are still in place. That means that the drainage structures in Kroll Road still had a silt protection around them, and so they weren't being particularly effective. And so the large puddle of water shown in Neil's picture, a substantial portion of that came from Kroll Road, not from the Carlton property. But what the Carltons did was they changed the grade immediately north of the drainage structure so that less water would go in that direction. And the landscaper who did the work is providing, the numbers. They dig a hole, they put gravel in it, they put a box in it, and then they fill the hole with gravel so that the water can drain out through the bottom. So we hope to have those numbers at your next meeting. So that's why we would request a continuance
Okay,
to your next meeting.
okay. Okay, thank you, Mr. Riley. Warren, did that address some of your questions? I think,
Well, actually, not really. It just underscores my confusion on the timeline. I'm looking at the pictures that were sent, and I'm not seeing what Councilor Riley is describing. And when I walk the site, it's very clear where the water is running into the catch basin from, and it's from the lawn next door, not from the street. Again, I think it may have been solved by putting in the drain on the upslope but I don't know that, and I have no information that would suggest that the engineering and runoff calculations, et cetera, have been provided and signed off on by the town. But I just want to, before I sign off on anything, I just want to be certain that Dr. Cole's problem has been solved. And so far, I haven't seen anything that would suggest that it has.
okay, thank you, Warren. I think if we get information from the applicant and Mr. Riley, and also Mr. Temple's evaluation of the situation, I believe that will answer your questions. And that is the information that we have requested that we don't have yet. So, all right, very good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Warren. Bob Wirtschafter.
I have nothing more to add.
All right, thank you. And this is Catherine. I actually don't have anything more to add. I think that it's pretty clear that there's certain information that we've requested that we don't have yet. I would be in favor of continuing the matter till that information can be obtained. I would like to ask the applicant if you could consider continuing to our February 14th meeting rather than the January 24th. And I'm suggesting this for a couple of reasons. One is the agenda already for January 24th is very full. I think the issue of um, who and our ability to get his evaluation on the information that you provide, and some additional time may be needed for that. So if it would be agreeable to you, if I could suggest that we continue the matter instead of to January 24th, that we continue it to February 14th. Would that work for you, Mr. Riley?
Well, Catherine, I didn't know you were a hopeless romantic wanting to continue this to Valentine's Day. But since I'm your soulmate in that hopeless romanticism, February 14th will be fine.
That's great. All right. So if I could suggest to the board that we make a motion, the applicant is in agreement, and if we could make a motion to continue this matter to our February 14th meeting. Could I have a motion to that effect?
Art Sprue, I'll make that motion.
Thank you. And could I have a second to that motion?
It's Warren Chain, I second it.
Thank you, Warren. So we'll do our roll call vote. Art Sprue,
Art Sprue, approve.
Tom Gagan,
Tom Gagan, approve.
Warren Chain,
Warren Chain, approve.
Bob Wirtschafter.
Bob Wirtschafter, approve.
Bob Dubus has recused himself, and this is Catherine Halpern, and I also approve. So thank you, and thank you, Mr. Riley. So we've continued this matter until our February 14th meeting.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right, next item on our agenda is a change of use for 878 Main Street. And this is for Unit B at 878 Main Street, Abu Granger. Change of use from retail to a professional real estate office. Do I have someone who will be presenting this matter for the board? Do I have anyone representing Abu Granger? All right. In that case, why don't we just take a look at our staff report, and I'll bring out a few points, and then I'll ask for questions of from the board. This is a proposed change of use. It is in general business 3, and it is a change of use from retail to real estate office. So it is basically a change to a less intensive use with less traffic from the public. It is subject to historic business district approval for any exterior changes and signage. We need to look at the site plan and the parking and all of those considerations, our general site plan approval criteria. And this would be for a professional office, which is a permitted use in GB3, so that it does not require zoning board of appeals. Taking a look through our standard site plan review criteria, Ally notes that there's only a few issues that we need to really consider. Everything else is satisfied, and that's the adequacy and arrangement of vehicular traffic and circulation, also adequacy and arrangement of pedestrian traffic access and circulation, walkway structures, etc., and the location, arrangement, appearance, and sufficiency of off-street parking and loading. Looking at it again very quickly, a total of 3 parking spaces is required for the new use, and the applicant is proposing to use the existing parking spaces. Again, looking at referral comments, and again, we'll go through and see if the board has more discussion and comments. Referral comments, fire department, no concerns. Traffic safety, no concerns. Conservation Commission, no concerns. Central permit coordinator, professional offices are allowed by right in GB3. Historic business district, as noted, the applicant will need to apply to HBDC for approval of any exterior changes and signage. From the health department, I've reviewed the site plan application for the renovation and change of use at this property. This property is connected to the municipal sewer system. The change will not affect sewage at the property, and Health Department has no concerns. So from there, let's just go through the board, see if you have questions or discussion on this submission. So Art Sprue, any questions, discussion?
I only have one comment, Catherine.
Yeah,
Underneath the assumption that there is going to be no site work that is going to be called for or required,
right.
I would say that condition, the proposed suggested condition number 2 might be able to be eliminated, but I'll
Oh.
defer that back to staff if they do see that there isn't any conditions from a site perspective, then they may be able to eliminate that. Other than that, I have no other comments.
Okay, great. Great. I'm just going to ask Ally right off. Would that work to eliminate condition number 2 if there is no, as we go through the board, if it turns out that there's no site work requested?
I do feel comfortable with that. That's
All
a
right.
good point.
Great. Thank you, Ally.
Thank you.
Tom Gagan,
Tom Gagan, no additional comments. Thank you.
Warren Chain,
Warren Chain, no additional comments.
Bob Wirtschafter,
No additional comments.
Bob Dubus.
Bob Davis here. The only thing that I think that we have to do is to have the historical board review the signage, and just if they change the lighting. Other than that, I think it's a pretty no-brainer.
Okay, great. Great. And I did discuss the approval of the HBDC is required before they can go ahead with their change of use. So in some sense, it would be redundant of us to include that as a condition. We don't need to. So, but that is noted that their approval is needed. Thank you so much, Mr. Dubus. And from myself, I think I've made all the comments already that I need to make. I don't have any additional. I would suggest that could we have a motion to approve this change of use with the conditions as stated, as long as Bob Dubus is comfortable with what I've said about HBDC approval being required before a certificate of occupancy is issued.
Bob Davis has no objection to that.
Thank
Matter of
you.
fact, he would make the approval, please.
All right, so you're making a motion that we approve with the 2 standard conditions as stated in the staff report.
Yes, I am.
All right, may I have a second to that motion?
This is Warren Chain, I second it.
Great. All right, so let's do our roll call vote that we will approve this change of use with the conditions as stated. Art Sprue,
Art Sprue, approve.
thank you. Tom Gagan,
Tom Gagan, approve.
Warren Chain,
Warren Chain, approve.
Bob Wirtschafter,
Wirtschafter, approve.
Bob Dubus,
Bob Davis, approve.
and this is Catherine Halpern. I also approve that we approve this change of use with conditions as stated. Thank you very much. All right. So we can go on to our next agenda item. And this is a long-range planning discussion. And you've all received in your packets, and let me find my copy here. Your packets, a copy of the memo from Peter Kokolis, the Affordable Housing Trust Chair, and members of the Affordable Housing Trust, to all planning board members regarding their recommendation for year-round housing zoning bylaw amendments. In other words, they've reviewed the protective zoning bylaws of the town of Chatham, and they've come up with a few recommendations for amendments to bylaws that the planning board could take action on, should we so choose, that could allow for zoning that would encourage and allow development that would be able to provide year-round rentals and home ownership units that were not seasonal in nature and that would be considered affordable or attainable housing. And I think it's safe to say that the planning board is, in our actions in the past, I understand the planning board is interested in increasing the opportunities for diversity of housing options in the town of Chatham, which does include opportunities for moderate priced rentals or owned units for year-round residents of Chatham. So what I'd like to do is just briefly just give you a brief statement of what they've come up with 5 recommendations. I'm just going to go through all 5, just give you a brief statement of what it is, and then let's go through them one by one, and we can discuss them as a board. And again, this is an open discussion. Whatever points you want to bring up, whether or not we want to take action, and at the end of our discussion as a board, we might want to consider if there are some of these that we'd like to begin taking action on, how do we prioritize them and how do we work them into our long-range planning schedule? Because we do have quite a few items on our plate in long-range planning. So what they have suggested is, number 1, revisions to the affordable dwelling units mandatory bylaw. So that's one suggestion they've made. The second one is revisions to the accessory dwelling unit bylaw. Number 3 is revisions to the apartments incidental to a commercial or industrial use. And number 4 is revisions to multifamily zoning. And number 5 is creation of small lot zoning. So those were the 5 recommendations that were made by the Affordable Housing Trust, where our bylaws could be amended in such a way that we could allow and encourage more opportunities for year-round rentals and ownership that were not seasonal in nature. So let's start with the first one. And if you don't mind, I'll just read it through and then we can open it up to discussion by the board. So point 1 was revisions to the Affordable Dwelling Units Mandatory Bylaw. The Affordable Dwelling Units Mandatory Bylaw is an inclusionary zoning bylaw which ensures that residential developments of 10 or more units include affordable units equivalent to at least 10% of all units in the development. The bylaw provides a number of options for the developer. Instead of building the affordable units in the development, it gives the developer the option to A, build an equivalent number of affordable units off-site under the same requirements as any on-site units, or B, donate land that the planning board determines is suitable for the development of an equivalent number of affordable units off-site, or C, for a non-rental project to pay a fee in lieu of the actual units, equal to 3 times the annual income of an income eligible household of 4 for each unit. Density bonuses may also be granted by the planning board if the developer provides a greater number of affordable units than the mandatory 10%. However, the town has been advised by council that this section of the bylaw cannot be used as it does not also allow for waiving of dimensional requirements. All right, so that is what we have written regarding the Affordable Dwelling Units Mandatory Bylaw. So let's just go through the board. I'm going to ask for comments and discussion. What you might like to consider is what might be the options for amending the bylaw that would allow for an increase in its ability to allow and encourage year-round either ownership or rental units that are moderate or affordable. So that would be the first one. And then also just in terms of how simple or complex these revisions may be. And we may also ask Ally for her comments on that. So Art Sprue, your comments on item number 1.
Thank you, Catherine. When I was reading these and starting with number 1, I was really confused by what the Affordable Housing Trust was asking us to do. I wasn't sure if they wanted us to revise this, what they wanted us to revise this to, and to what degree. It didn't appear like any of these had formal recommendations to say, we propose this, or we suggest this. So I'm a little bit confused by that.
May I comment, Arthur?
Go ahead.
I think this is Catherine's response to that. I think they're leaving that up to us. I think what they did is they identified bylaws where they saw that some amendment might allow for greater encouragement of this type of housing, but I think they're leaving the thinking to us on exactly how we should revise it.
Yeah, well, it certainly would help if their board, this is a prime focus of what they do, could suggest a few things, and so that the burden doesn't just fall 100% on the planning board, because that appears then what the outcome of this would be. I do recall from some of the other hearings that we've had that, for example, item C, we thought that is an item that should probably go away or not be an option, which was fee in lieu of actually building something. That I recall some of the other board members raising as a concern and an issue that certainly just given money is not necessarily solving the problem by itself, but if it was a requirement to build a unit, then that's the burden that should be on the applicant who's proposing it.
Okay.
And I might have limited comments on the rest of them only because I'm not quite sure where we should be going with many of these different things. I'd be certainly interested in hearing what all the other board members have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Art. I do see Ally's hand raised, and I think I'd like to recognize Ally because I think she may also have a response to your concerns, Arthur.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. So I just want to, I guess I can give a little background to the board. So the trust did review these potential zoning bylaw amendments, as well as many other housing initiatives, some having to do with land purchase or town-owned land, and also some more broader policy issues. But they felt that the zoning initiatives that they were looking at would best be dealt at the planning board level, as Catherine had stated, so that we can really vet them. So in my mind, I would ask the board to have an open mind about all 5 of these recommendations. And if we feel like one is can be easily accomplished to get to this town meeting, I'd be happy to do the research into it. As well as all the other potential zoning amendments. I'd be happy to bring some examples to the board from other towns in Massachusetts and on the Cape, just so everyone can kind of have a better, fuller understanding of how we could go forward potentially with the zoning amendments. But I think right now is more of a preliminary conversation of which ones do you think are doable, which ones kind of rise to the top for you all, and then we can, really dig in. If the board does in fact want to go this direction.
Yeah. And again, this is Catherine again. I'll just add to that comment and thank you very much, Ally. And also, as always, we need to consider that in terms of everything else that we have on our plate in terms of long-range planning, and we need to give priorities to certain things. And with that always comes up the issue, as Ally has mentioned, and as Arthur, you brought out, which of these 5 might be the simplest to revise and to put forward. But also, I think I'd like to ask the planning board to consider what is most needed by the town. There might be some that might be a little more complex to deal with, but they might be very much something that could be very, very helpful to the town. And that's also our responsibility. So we need to weigh and balance all these things. So with that, if I could go on to Tom Gagan. And oh, I see Peter Kokolis has his hand raised. I'll recognize Peter if you're here. You must be here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'm maybe to help Arthur a little bit, and maybe the rest of the board. We put this in perspective. The Community Housing Trust is made up of a selectman and two community members. That trust, we're trying to change it to broaden it to make it more inclusive and to move ahead. But in any case, the issues or the comments you see before you that were agreed to by the Community Housing Trust, I think Ally presented it correctly. However, it came from the Community Housing Partnership, which used to be called our Affordable Housing Committee. They reviewed a whole bunch of things that they thought would be important to be reviewed, and they presented it to the Housing Trust. We did discuss a couple of things on, potential options, but you have to remember there are 5 members of the Board of Selectmen on there, and eventually, whatever you do, whatever you decide, first of all, it's not our position to tell you what to do. All right. I understand providing options. And the second is whatever you come up is going to have to come back to the Board of Selectmen and partly the Housing Trust, but mostly the Board of Selectmen for a vote. So, we don't want to you guys are the experts. And so the issue is brought up, and there are a couple of options. For instance, raise the price, move the houses, or do something to that effect. But the whole idea is to say, here from the Community Housing Partnership, here are the issues we see that could help. And we'd like to at least look at some options. That's exactly how the ADU bylaw started. It started from the Affordable Housing Trust. The Affordable Housing went to the Board of Selectmen and came to the board and then came to the Planning Board. So I hope that helps. It's not a perfect answer, and it does put the burden on the Planning Board, but I think you guys have to look at what all you're doing and what would make sense for you to do in the next whatever time period, 6 months to a year or 2 years. Okay, well, thanks very much, and I'll get off.
Thank you, Peter. So let's go on to Tom Gagan for any comments you have about this first possibility, revisions to the Affordable Dwelling Units Mandatory Bylaw.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tom Gagan. I do have some comments. There is some bookkeeping that we need to do from the board. This has been discussed briefly, but never come to our attention of the board members, is that we as a board, when we put the affordable dwelling units together in a bylaw that got passed, we set a 2-year date by which we would review that. I don't think that's happened to date. And I think we should do that because we made that promise to the community. So that would be comment number 1 is let's talk about at some point at one of our meetings, what has our current affordable dwelling unit bylaw accomplished. I know there was a lot of concern from the community about it was going to do this, that, or something else. Some of those issues never materialized. And if we have something positive from what has happened from that bylaw, could we expand upon that? So that might be something we could look into, but I do believe that we should address our commitment for a review.
Tom, this is Catherine. Forgive me for interrupting, but if I could just interject. The nomenclature, I think, is a little misleading. Actually, I believe what you're referring to is item 2, revisions to the accessory dwelling unit bylaw. So, and yes, you're absolutely right. The board made a commitment to review the performance of that bylaw after 2 years, but I believe that item number 2 which is the accessory dwelling unit bylaw. So can we look at that when we get to number 2?
I
And
stand corrected.
no worries. As I say, the names are pretty similar and it can be easily misleading. So if you have any further comments on this item number 1.
I do.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I'd like to agree with Arthur about under item 1, subparagraph B. Also, I have some comments about C. I don't think this board has protected the town's interest in dealing with remuneration for subdivisions and plans. We had Hunter's Rise, and I'm still smarting from some of what had happened there. I think it's very, the property values in the town of Chatham, as elsewhere in the Cape, are rising very, very rapidly. So as far as Arthur's comment about donating land, land isn't becoming any cheaper either. And I'd like to see some comments about donating land that the planning board determines. I don't think that is a viable option for us. We can't find land, the town can't find land. So I'd like to have some serious comments or conversations about the practicality of that. Under C, I don't think that we can set a value of an income eligible house. I'd like to see household. I'd like to see that tied to actually the land values and the property values of these homes being built as a percentage of that home sale. That way, as the values of land and new development and development in general for properties, as that increases, that the town benefits from that increase as a percentage of that value. That may be an easier formula for us to follow, and it may rise much more rapidly, at least the value, instead of the actual income of people who are eligible. I'd like to talk more about that. The last part of that, where the council has talked about also, it does not also allow for waiver of dimensional requirements. We have before us, in terms of the West Chatham neighborhood, the ability with what we're doing with zoning to start to address that. I think some of the dimensional requirements we have talked about. Also, it's been suggested by a board member that perhaps we start talking about difference in elevation for a building. We cannot go sideways. We don't have the land. And if we could go up some small increment to allow, with special permits, special conditions, the ability to have 3 stories with the upper story dedicated to attainable and affordable housing, that may be a way of dealing with some dimensional requirements. I think that there are things in terms of our priority that our ability to talk about what is required by this board and our priorities, that housing is number 1, 2, and 3. So we may have to put some of what we have on our plate now to the side burner, back burner, and really focus on what this board can do to attain more affordable and certainly attainable housing. That to me is a primary function of what this board needs to do. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Tom, for your comments. Let's go to Warren Chain.
Yes, Warren Chain. I think this is an extremely interesting document, and I am very much in favor of reviewing all 5 of the pieces and the recommendations to see what we could come up with. That said, it would appear that the Housing Trust has concluded that there are defects in all of these 5 areas that could be improved upon, but there's no data here to suggest what the defects are. I have no idea how many affordable dwelling units have been built in the town. I assume that it will not be a large number, or they wouldn't have proposed changes in the bylaw. But without information, it's hard for me to focus on whether a change in A, B, or C, or all of the above would make sense. Nor is it possible to think of alternatives that may have been discussed around their table. But I am in favor of I certainly am in favor of reviewing all of the specifics in the bylaw on the assumption that it has not been productive in producing affordable housing units. And anything we can do to improve upon it with the objective of increasing the units would make sense to me. It does make sense to me further that that changes both to number one here, but some of the others as well, may make sense for us to consider as a board whether we ought to go forward with a more comprehensive selection of proposed zoning changes to increase affordable housing, which would include our West Chatham Neighborhood Center zoning, which is the quid pro quo for turning most of the town back into R20 zoning. The idea is to increase the affordable housing units in West Chatham Neighborhood Center. Anything that fits and does the same thing may make sense for us to put forward as a comprehensive set of zoning changes, rather than to try and go through the pain and aggravation of getting town meeting to approve one by one proposed changes. So that's just food for thought as to for the board to consider. Now, also, it seems to me I've only been on the board less than 2 years now, but I've not heard anything further from the Board of Selectmen to change what our marching orders were when I joined the planning board, which were essentially to answer the question, is any house too big in Chatham? And if so, what are you going to do about it in terms of zoning? And then two, to try and come up with the zoning for the West Chatham Neighborhood Center. Now, until we can address what the Board of Selectmen has challenged us to do, it's almost mind-boggling for me to jump in and try and to say, well, now we're going to try and revise zoning in 5 different parts of the zoning bylaws and regulations of the town, and with the time that it's likely to take to assess alternatives, likely outcomes, public hearings for all of them, each and add that to getting back to, is any house too big, and also the West Chatham Neighborhood Center. So I'm very much in favor of focusing on all of these, but specifically on number one. But I certainly would like to have data about how successful or unsuccessful the bylaw has been, and also some input from the Housing Trust as to what it is that they found was essentially defective or possibly could benefit from improvement, even if there are no specific options. Just what is it that has caused them to put this on the list of things that need changes? So that's all my comment for now.
Great. Thank you, Warren. I see Ally's hand raised. Ally, would you like to go ahead?
Just very quickly, Catherine, I just wanted to kind of discuss very quickly again, number one, and the revisions to the affordable dwelling units mandatory, and why some of this kind of rose to the top for both the trust and I also believe the Chatham Community Housing Partnership. So right now we do have the pay a fee in lieu of the units, and that is usually what the developers will choose, is to basically buy out of their affordable housing requirement. As Tom alluded to, that happened in Hunter Rise. I believe that we received a little over $200,000 for that buyout. and that went directly into the Affordable Housing Trust. That's what the calculation that's required in this bylaw. And, you know, is $200,000 enough to build a unit in town? Not now. And so that's, you know, one of the main issues, I think, with the bylaw, as well as the density bonus that's been ruled by council, that, you know, that part we can't do. And I believe that was also through the Hunter Rise subdivision that we found that out. So there are lots of issues, you know, with, you know, all 5 of these that we could potentially do to help, you know, aid in the year-round housing creations changes to these bylaws. So if the board, you know, wants to kind of discuss these one by one like we're doing, and then which ones you feel rise to the top, I'd be happy, like I said, to do some more research and bring that data to you to discuss. I do want to just briefly touch upon as well our timing for this. You know, if we do feel like we want to bring one of these to town meeting this year, it has to be done in a fairly quick manner. I believe the warrant closes in a few months, so we'd have to, you know, go through a public hearing, bring it to the select board in the next 2 months in order to do it. So that's why we felt the urgency to put this on your agenda tonight. If you do feel like you could, you know, one of these or 2 of these rise to the top for you, I could try to get some data together and put it on your next agenda, which is January 24th, to discuss this more. So that's kind of another background piece that I just wanted to bring up as we're talking about going through these recommendations.
Okay. Thank you, Ally. This is Catherine. I do see Tom has his hand raised, but I'd like to make a couple comments first. In addition, as I mentioned when we started this agenda item, we also need to consider this, and as Warren brought out, in the context of all of the other initiatives that we have on our plate. Warren, you're absolutely correct. When COVID came into play, we had to put all long-range planning on the back burner. We were confined to only considering regulatory matters. And then when the COVID restriction eased up, I believe we decided as a board to pick up where we left off with West Chatham, that we would continue to keep the massing of residential structures, that a lot of work has been done on that. It's still on our agenda to go forward, but we haven't acted on it. We decided to just pick up one of our long-range planning initiatives and continue with it after COVID. So it's still on our plate. The massing of residential structures is still on our plate. West Chatham Neighborhood Center, as you know, is still on our plate. The revision of just again as a reminder, the revision of our floodplain bylaw is still on our plate. And there's 2 aspects of that. Ally has reminded me this morning when we talked. There's the general revision that, you know, something that we've had on our things to do for a couple of years now. We just need to reevaluate the floodplain bylaw overall. But now it's come up that there's a couple of mandatory changes we need to make, or we will not be included in the FEMA requirements, and we need to make those changes. And so those we actually do need to put on our agenda to bring them before annual town meeting 2022. We could reserve the overall changes to a later consideration. We also have the continuation with the other recommendations from the Route 28 visioning study regarding the implementation of other neighborhood centers, Cornfield and Kroll Road, for example, and other recommendations from the Route 28 visioning study. We do have as Mr. Gagan mentioned, the review of the accessory dwelling unit bylaw, but that is part of this consideration, so we can take a look at that. There was a small bylaw that was amendment that was brought before us as a citizen, the sheds, and it's really a kind of, how to put it, almost a small housekeeping correction in that bylaw. We need to bring that before this annual town meeting 2022. And also the Historic Commission is preparing a proposed bylaw amendment for that they hope will incentivize the preservation of historic structures. We do not need to be involved in the drafting of that. They're working on that with Cape Cod Commission and with Community Development Department. However, as the planning board, we do need to sponsor it. We need to hold the public hearing, and we need to go through that process. So in that way, that does come onto our plate and potentially for this annual town meeting. So I'm just in the background, and it's something that Ally and I can sort of craft out some of the details about the scheduling, about how the locality of what to go forward with and how to prioritize our long-range planning initiatives. And we can talk about this also more at our January 24th meeting, where we will be reviewing the public comment on the West Chatham Neighborhood Center zoning proposal draft. So I just wanted to review some of those. You're absolutely right. We still have all of those things on our plate. And Mr. Gagan has his hand up. So Mr. Gagan, I would like to recognize you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tom Gagan. I don't think the proverbial sword of Damocles should be held over this board's head. There are priorities that I wish this board would put forward in terms of kind of a state of emergency, which is in the news all the time. And that has to do with how the towns in and on the Cape deal with families in affordable units. You have outlined a lot of work for this board to do, but I'd like to see if this board would prioritize that as a very much forward priority for this board. Having said that, to try to do the work that we are talking about and even addressing this memorandum from the Affordable Housing Trust, I don't think that we have to make the deadline for this particular upcoming town meeting. Special town meetings are held, but if we prioritize what this board wishes to accomplish in the area of affordable and attainable housing, there's no reason why we couldn't bring this to a town meeting, special meeting in the fall. So I don't want to have that a timeline deter us from what I think is a primary issue for this board to face. And if we can face it in a timeline that makes sense, not for this upcoming May, June town meeting, but certainly something in the fall would make more sense. But we do need to prioritize what the immediate issues are for the citizens of Chatham and the workforce in Chatham. And a lot of the issues that we keep, not us personally, the board, but they seem to get shuffled around and don't become priority. The issue for us as a board is that if we do prioritize this, we know, as we found out for our ADU bylaw, there's going to be a lot coming at us. There's going to be shotgun blasts left and right, and all of the issues that we hear about, the environment, the infrastructure, the water. No matter what we try to do, there will be resistance. And I hope that we put together something as a priority that we were very successful in educating enough people with the ADU. This board put in a tremendous amount of work privately, publicly, public meetings to convince the majority of people at a town meeting that this was a primary issue and function for this board. So I have my soapbox here, and when I stand on it, my head hits the ceiling in most rooms in my house. But I really want to put forward my passion about what is important to the town and this issue. So I will address more of this as we get into number 2 and a document that was sent to this board for us to read. Thank you for the time.
Great. Thank you, Tom. And again, I see Ally's hand raised. Did you want to make a comment?
Just very quickly, Tom just made me remember something that I wanted to mention as well to the board, is that we believe that these 5 potential revisions to the ADU bylaw would fall under a new bill that was just passed, the Housing Choice Bill, which would allow, instead of at town meeting for a 2/3 vote, it would allow for a majority vote instead. And so granted, we do need to get that approved and agreed upon by the Department of Housing and Community Development and also our town council, but we feel that these 5 would be in line with what the bill allows, which would be that reduced voting amount at town meeting to a majority instead of the supermajority.
Great. Thank you, Ally. So I think we need to go to Bob Wirtschafter for your comments about item 1, revisions
Yeah,
to
so
the dwelling units. Yeah.
So what Ally just said is really it changes what I was going to say, which is I'm not sure I want to commit to making a lot of changes that we really need, knowing the opposition that we would be facing. But a 50% level is something that I think we can do and achieve. So it changes what I think we should be doing. In regard to number 1, can Ally take a minute and explain to us what we would need to do to change the density, allowing for density bonuses? Is that something that's totally out of the picture, or do we just need to rewrite the bylaw?
Yeah.
So-
Go ahead, Ally. Yeah.
Thank you, Catherine. So we would just need to rewrite and craft the bylaw in a different way. So I think town council opined during the Hunter Rise subdivision that the reason why density bonuses weren't allowed in the subdivisions was because of there was no waiving of dimensional requirements. So it didn't allow the planning board to change the setbacks, the lot size, things like that. And so if that was allowed, that could have occurred in the Hunter Rise subdivision, but the planning board doesn't have that option through the bylaw. And so that would be something that we could potentially change to allow the planning board to waive some of those dimensional requirements, like the setbacks and things like that, in order to provide additional density in those subdivisions and have the density bonus that was really outlined in this bylaw. So that's one thing. And then for the others, I really think that we would also have to change, as was alluded to many times tonight already, the actual fee in lieu. It's just the amount of money that we receive for the buyout is not nearly enough that we could buy, anything in town or even build, a unit with that amount of money. So I think that really has to be looked at just based upon the prices in town. And it is, as Peter had said before, the Community Housing Partnership, they did, outline in their letter, and I should have provided that to you, but I can send it as a follow-up. They did provide, what they had thought and envisioned could be some changes to these bylaws as well. So that could give the board some guidance, and I would be happy to send that in an email follow-up.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. So I totally agree that getting money is not the answer here, and that we need to require land or actual property units that get built. So I think that's probably the easiest thing we have. But I also think that we're living in the past if we think developments of 10 is the trigger, because there just aren't 10 unit developments out there anymore. We're going to need to lower that number to 5 and have a trigger of 4 or 5, not 10, because otherwise we're going to have no opportunity to. We're going to go to all this trouble to rewrite this bylaw, and nobody in the next 10 years is going to have 10 unit properties. So I think we should be thinking more in terms of any kind of development of any kind that's not affordable has to contribute something to affordable. And that could be, other than a single family homes, which I don't know that we want to have all people to be building too many more single family homes. But I'm all for this. I hope that the rest of the town shares this board's understanding of how this is one of the major challenges that Chatham is facing right now. I think maybe 50% will. I never thought 2/3 would. So what you said is encouraging, and I think we should be developing a overall new a bylaw or whatever we call it that encompasses most of 1 through 5, and that is one effort by us to totally change all of this and not piecemeal, because I just don't, I mean, we spent 2 years to get 3 accessory dwelling units. That we can't do that again and call ourselves successful.
Great. Okay, Bob. Is that it, Bob? This is Catherine. Great suggestions. I just want to say to all the board members who have spoken, I just think really you've given some great suggestions, and also it's really good to hear how committed everyone is to, doing whatever we can to help the town provide a diversity of housing options. So it's great. So Bob Dubus, do you have some comments on point number 1, or general comments as some have?
Bob Dubus, yeah, I'm here. I think it's been long overdue for a revision of this, but I also believe that it's going to take a darn big magic stick to make all this work. Thank you.
Okay, a darn big magic stick. Do you want to give us any more clarification about what you mean by a darn big magic stick, or what that might entail?
It's going to take a lot of work by a lot of people, and you're going to try to convince a lot of people that do not want more massing, that do not want more buildings close together. They want less buildings, less this, less that. It's going to take a lot of convincing to a bunch of people to get this through. But I'm in favor of it, but I just think it's going to take a big stick, magic stick.
Okay. Okay, great. Great. So this is Catherine. On point 1, I would say, I think some of you have pointed out very intelligent possibilities for changing. I agree that paying money in lieu of the units, especially when it's money that's far less than what the cost of any one unit would be to build, that we should reevaluate that aspect of it. I think reevaluating the dimensional requirements, if we could be able to waive dimensional requirements or amend them so that density bonuses could be given to developers. I also agree that we should consider that developments of lesser number of units. I think it's true that we may be looking at only smaller developments in the future, 4 to 5 units, and requiring affordable units even for those smaller developments would be useful. But I think we need to, so I think you've pointed out some great ideas so far. And in this option, I think, as one of you mentioned, we need some data, but I would venture to guess that probably most developments have chosen to pay the fee in lieu of building affordable units. That's an educated guess, but I'm going to guess that's what the data will show us. And so we want to make this part of the bylaw perform better. In other words, we want to structure it such that it will actually produce the creation of affordable units in tandem with smaller developments of 4 to 5 units. So that's what I'd suggest. I see Warren's hand is up. Did you want to make a comment, Warren?
I did. I think there's violent agreement among the board that amending number one, if not all five, makes sense. I would only ask that as we go forward here, we give some consideration as to how this would mesh with or stand separate from West Chatham Neighborhood Center zoning. Pretty much any development that were to take place under the bylaw that has been drafted would have 10 units in it. And if we lowered that to 5, they all would. Would this mean that the bylaw changes that we're talking about would also apply in the West Chatham Neighborhood Center, or would they be, a standalone set of bylaws, and this would be anywhere else in town except in the neighborhood center? I don't have an opinion one way or the other, but only to say that as we were tinkering with this, just to make sure that we're looking forward at 4 or 5 or 6 different neighborhood centers, all of which are going to have developments in them that will have affordable housing as one of the objectives. And that clearly ought to be done with one eye on the rest of the zoning that hopefully would be synergistic in achieving that objective. That's the end of comment.
Yeah. Thank you, Warren. Ally's hand is up, and I'll call on you. I'll just make a general comment. I think synergistic is the word, but I'm going to let Ally comment more thoroughly in response to your question.
I just wanted to say that in the current bylaw right now, under the section, it would apply to both subdivisions as well as multifamily homes. So right now it would apply to both as the bylaw is written. But the board, as we go through this, we can obviously, discuss what changes need to be made or what we need to do to accomplish our goals.
Yeah. So, I mean, the way I understand, and Ally, correct me if I'm wrong, even looking at all 5 of these suggestions, which we haven't gone through them all yet, some of you have suggested that we take all 5 of them and create a package of zoning that is intended to increase the opportunity for diversity in housing options. So I would understand it would apply townwide, not just in West Chatham, but it would apply in West Chatham, how to put it, if you, like the accessory dwelling unit bylaw applies in West Chatham, if someone within the zoning district of the West Chatham Neighborhood Center zoning, if that gets passed at town meeting and it's implemented, the accessory dwelling unit bylaw would be active there in that situation. Does that make sense? So they would still apply to each situation townwide, but also within the West Chatham Neighborhood Center zoning as appropriate, if that makes sense. Okay. All right. And I see Tom Gagan has his hand raised.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tom Gagan. I might remind us that we haven't finished our zoning debate on West Chatham. So I would see it that we could do some additional items, particularly around density, not density, but space requirements and other issues that would encourage this, but that could be separate from a general bylaw. And I think you're right, Madam Chair, that general bylaw would apply to the entire town. My fear is, or at least my question is, as we go through these various villages in town, that there are some uniquenesses to each one. And there are things within each village that we'd want to preserve through bylaw protection. And that sometimes we have to be cognizant of the effect of making a general bylaw that may not work in each of these areas. But right now we're on West Chatham. There are some issues that have been brought up about West Chatham. that could allow for additional housing to be placed with special permits, that would be applicable to just West Chatham. And a general bylaw is something that we'd have to do, I think, independently of what we're currently doing. We're coming pretty much, I believe, to the close of what this board has agreed to for zoning issues in the West Chatham area. So I'd like not to confuse the two. I think we have an opportunity now to do some minor tweaking in West Chatham. And I think the comment that Bob Dubus has made is there is a word, Bob, for your magic stick. And the magic stick that we are going to have to defend with is the word density. There will be a lot of pushback from a subset of people in town who don't want to see the density within this town changed. And that's what we have to convince as a board, that with proper controls and with the proper application of any of these bonuses or dimensional changes or height changes, that the board is well aware of our need to protect that from being abused by anyone. And the comments that the board members have made about the value for subdivisions in the future, that is a very serious financial consideration. I think this board could come up with a formula or suggestions. As Bob Wirschafter pointed out, the money isn't important, really. I mean, it's a factor, but what's important is creating real, tangible apartments and issues for people. So I think we could think that through. But I do think that we have the opportunity, as we come closer with our priorities, to finish the West Chatham area. And as I said, repeating myself, I'm an old man, is to tweak a few things that might make some sense to help with that priority. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. And I see Bob Dubus's hand up. I'll just comment again. I believe I mentioned it, that at our next meeting, I think Ali will be bringing to us a summary of the comments from the public and other boards about the West Chatham Neighborhood Center zoning. So we will be, considering all of the input that we've received and looking at that summary and, hopefully making some decisions about any more revisions that we need to do to that draft. So that is on the agenda for January 24th. So Bob Dubus, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, Bob Lewis. Yes, all the time I've been on this board, the number one thing that we've come across is density and how to keep the density down, not up. And now all of a sudden you're presenting some situations that we want to increase the density. That's where I think we better do our P's and Q's on it and get everything straight before we go around ranting on how dense we want to make this town. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Bob. All right. I think we've gone through number one. I know some of you have suggested we look at these all as a piece, but let's continue going through them point by point. So the next one is item number 2, which is revisions to the accessory dwelling unit bylaw. The current ADU bylaw was approved at annual town meeting 2019. Since passage of the bylaw, the town has approved 3 applications through the special permit process. Tom Gagan, I think that's the answer to your review. The town has approved 3 applications. So I'm going to open this up to discussion from the board. I will first comment that, since we all work together on this bylaw, that the idea for some revisions to this bylaw that might make it perform better, I think we already have some in mind. We already know of some, but let's open it up for discussion. Art Sprue.
Thank you, Catherine. The major issue I was hearing when we went through the process of the ADU was the cap. Everybody was fearful that there were going to be so many ADUs that we better cap this. That didn't come to fruition. So certainly whatever was put in content-wise of the bylaw there is some limitations of getting applicants to come forward. It might be the whole issue associated with the annual lease that you would need, or the 12-month lease that you would need. I don't know. This would take some fleshing out to do. I thought the content of what we had and what we were pursuing associated with this seemed to be right on. We accounted for trying to do this within an existing dwelling, and they carved out a section of it. That was as of right. We allowed even separate structures to be put on site. So I'm not quite sure what else you would do to make adjustments associated with this. I think examples are going to be very helpful for me to understand, not just this one, but 3, 4, and 5. I don't see how 5 is going to happen within a very reasonable timeline when you're talking about making smaller lots closer together without scrutinizing that pretty carefully and where that would occur. But I think I, as an engineer, need examples to understand how this could go forward. And as Bob and Tom have commented on, the density issue. If we can't get support from an increased density issue, which is the pursuit of what we've done in West Chatham when we talked about affordable units, I don't know how any of these are going to go forward and do anything more than what we've attempted to do right now. That could be the real item that has the unintended consequences that we can't, just wipe with a single swing of our hands and it's gone. So my comment on this one and the rest of them are pretty much going to be in line, with the exception of 5. I think 5 is going to be way too difficult for us to accomplish any reasonable amount of time without fleshing out all the unintended consequences of number 5. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Arthur. Tom Gagan, do you want to make any additional comments about number 2, the ADU bylaw?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Great.
I think Arthur's right about the issues we had with the ADU, and Bob Dubus is also correct about the 800-pound gorilla in the town, and that's density. I'd like to be positive about this and say that even though we had some issues time-wise and certainly effort-wise on the ADU bylaw, it did get passed. And yeah, we shouldn't rise up the flag and say we got 3 units, but guess what? We have 3 more units than we had before. In terms of density, particularly if we do anything currently with West Chatham, is that we should take baby steps. I think with the ADU bylaw, if we wanted to increase that to some other incremental unit, having a track record of 2 years of what has happened wouldn't have the resistance that we had initially. I think if we put some cap on the number of buildings within West Chatham that could apply for a special permit for a 3rd floor, again, a little bit height in the building, to offset people who are going to really scream loudly about density, that may also help. But these are small incremental baby steps that I think the board could take and also put into our formula, as Bob Dubus has pointed out, that this is a real big bugaboo in town. So do we take the risk of putting these incremental caps on things? They may be artificial to begin with, but as time goes on, they may prove not to be the detriment that people are concerned with. There was an article that was in your packet also about ADU, and I don't know if this is the time to bring that in, maybe after we discuss these 5 positions, but there's information within that from the Cape Cod Times about thinking about what this board could do to support certainly the ADU or the construction of ADU and funds that are available. And I'm going to, in the interest of time, hold off on getting into that news article. But again, try to see if we could do something that may be just suggestive of some incremental, very tiny, well thought out steps. Even if we created in West Chatham 2 or 3 apartments that aren't there now, that's a beginning. And I don't see any one issue that this board could ever get involved with politically that would solve the issue for Chatham or any of the other towns. That's not realistic. And Dubus is right. That stick is going to become the 800-pound gorilla, and the stick is going to become a club. We don't want to go down that road and beat ourselves over the head to try to accomplish which really is something that is going to be very difficult politically to achieve. But please don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and see if we can start to do something on a relatively small scale to change some of the thinking in town. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. Warren, Shane, you want to take a look at this point number 2, accessory dwelling unit bylaw?
Oh, certainly. This is Warren Chain. I just want to reinforce yet again what Lewis had said about the gorilla of density. Everybody who talks to me privately, it's all about density. I think that with respect to that, we need to remind people that when the bulk of Route 28 was rezoned to residential, that was a major move to ensure that West Chatham doesn't become dense strip mall all the way to the border of Chatham. And the quid pro quo for taking large amounts of the road and returning it to residential zoning was the creation of the neighborhood centers, which would by definition be much more dense. So the quid pro quo, we're not increasing the density of the town with the neighborhood centers and having large numbers of units there relative to R20 zoning. We are in fact completing the other part of what had been proposed when we rezoned most of the town on 28 back to residential. We're not increasing the zoning or the density of Chatham overall once we do that. I do think that it's also going to be appropriate for us as we go forward to get information which would support my contention that all of the mega mansions that are being built in town that are taking, for example, the 1,500 square foot living area houses being built with 6,000 square foot living space if you count the below ground areas that are being built to be living space, have significantly increased the number of bedrooms for the lots on which they were built, and had that in and of itself is increasing, quote, the density of the town. It's in a different way, but that we can get some focus on. We don't want that density quite so much. We would much rather have the density where it belongs, which is in the neighborhood centers. The ADU question is, I think, again, for information gathering. I don't think many of us are surprised that there are not been a large number of ADUs, but it's not clear to me as to why or what we could do that would significantly increase the number. I think Tom's comment is well taken, however, that 3 is better than none, and we've got 3. If we can do something to make another 3 in the next year or so, so be it. This would be great. But at this point, I support changing it to the extent that it would have the effect of increasing the number of units, but I'm not sure what the problem is, so I don't have any intelligent suggestions about what to change. We need data, but that would be my comment.
Okay, great. Thank you, Warren. Bob Dubus, you still have your hand raised. Have a comment or is it raised?
I'm terribly sorry about that.
That's
Oh,
okay.
lower hand. I usually, you know, my hand was getting pretty tired hanging up so long, but I will wait my turn.
Thank you. All right, so I want to move to Bob Wertschafter. Comments more specifically on number 2, accessory dwelling unit bylaw.
Yeah, I think this is one we can afford to, we can take a little bit of time and review because we promised we would. So
Yeah,
I think it should be on the agenda for future.
good. Okay, great. Any other comments, or I think that's a good point. We did say we would, and so it would make sense. Bob Dubus, ADU.
Boy, now that I just put my hand down and got it refreshed, now I got to stick it back up there. No, only kidding. Listen, I've been approached by a few people that have said, because when the ADUs are normally for year-rounders, that
Yes.
a lot of people, even though they have a summer home here and don't live here year-round, said that they would consider putting an ADU up in their house to rent year-round if they could still rent the main house at the summer rate. If you're trying to, I don't quite know how to explain it all the way, but they would be willing, like if you had a separate garage,
Yeah.
and they rent their house out in the summer for 10 weeks out of the year, but they would still be willing to put an ADU over the garage and rent that out year round, as long as they could keep their rental with it. And that's something to look out or look into, because I believe there's a lot of empty garage spaces out there.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, no, I think this is Catherine. I believe that was one of the points that came up in our initial discussions about the ADU. We resolved it, and the community resolved it, that it had to be both dwelling areas as year-round dwelling, that it was a resident of Chatham who opened up another residential unit in their home or above a garage for a year-round lease, for a year-round resident. But
well, the thing, Catherine, the problem with that is there's not enough people that live here year-round that have the affordability to build those. They're quite expensive now, whereas somebody that rents their house and is in hopes of living here year-round when they retire, it would be a good start to do something like that, and it would be a way to contribute ADUs.
Yeah, no, I'm how to say, I'm just reiterating that point. If I just wanted to finish that, we did consider that. We didn't do it in the first passing of that bylaw, but that might be a change that the board could consider, that we opened up how the main dwelling unit was used, but the ADU dwelling unit would still be year round. That might be a point the board could consider as a revision that might open up more possibilities. I'm just basically reiterating that point. I do see a member of the public, I believe, or is it Carolyn? I see a hand raised. Did you want to go ahead?
Yes, if I could speak, I wasn't sure if it was appropriate for me to interrupt you folks. So as you know, I'm the chair of the Community Housing Partnership.
Yes, thank you, Carolyn.
I just thought I just would take just a minute or two to give you a little insight as to what our reasoning was on some of these recommendations on the item one.
Yeah, Carolyn, this is Catherine. If I could just ask you to confine your discussion right now to item 1 or 2, because the board hasn't gone through all of them yet. That'd be great. Thank you.
Absolutely, no problem. So with item number 1, most of the things that you have already mentioned, which was the price that the builder's required to pay to buy out, is no way reflective of the cost of what it costs to build a house. It's tied to the income of the potential tenant rather than the cost of what it costs to build a house. So we'd like an adjustment there to make it more realistic. Also to make the requirement for developments of less than 10 houses, because in Chatham that we don't do that many that are that large. So that was the 2 points on that. And then on the ADU, specifically the point that Bob just mentioned, we'd really like it to be open up to non-resident homeowners, I guess, our seasonal homeowners. 60% of the housing stock is owned by them. So we still want it to be, the rental would be a year round, but they don't have to be year round residents, and they can rent their property however they want, as long as they have that one portion that would be a year round rental. But they rent it the way they want already. So we're just asking them to give us a slice of a year round rental. We would be happy with that. So specifically, that was what we hoped. We also know we need to do more education for the ADU, hopefully to get people more interested in it. And one more thing, I just want to say, no matter what the fight is, I know the fight is going to be hard, and I just don't want you to get discouraged and not proceed. Because, I mean, when we put out this ADU in the beginning, we had so much backlash from that. And this passed overwhelmingly at town meeting. So sometimes there's a group of people that yell and scream a lot, and then there's the people who vote. And at least give us the opportunity to take it to town meeting. That's what we're hoping for, whether it's this town meeting or a special town meeting. But we need to work in this direction. So, all right, thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Carolyn. So let's go to point number 3. That is regarding revisions to the apartments incidental to a commercial or industrial use. Currently allowed in the general business and industrial districts, as long as the lot includes at least 10,000 square feet for each apartment and no more than 4 apartments per building in the GB district, and no more than a single 2-bedroom apartment incidental to a commercial or industrial use in the industrial district. So comments from the boards about revising this bylaw that might allow for more apartments incidental to commercial or industrial use. Art Spru.
Thank you, Catherine. The 3 and 4 seem to be similar in nature. This is the density issue. If you're going to try and shoehorn more density in and force it to be affordable, that's really the crux of it. And I think before you just make the deep dive, that item needs to be flushed out with the community and see if it's supported. Otherwise, we can be spending an awful lot of time evaluating items, including 2, 3, and 4 on this list, 5 on this list, and if the density and to what degree is going to be really the item that we need feedback on, and without that, it may not be worthwhile pursuing much of anything unless you can get that support for higher density for the affordable housing. So to me, I'm okay with all of this, but I'm not okay with it if I can't get the support from the town. So
Right.
I'm not interested in putting the town out there into a onerous position if we haven't done our due diligence as a board of understanding and defining. This is not just about our board and the Affordable Housing and the Trust Board. This has to do with the support from the community. Even if it's just a simple majority, we still need to know that that's the case on this. Do they want the additional density? Are they going to allow it? And where are they going to allow it? That's really it. And once we have the answers to those things, then you can decide, is it item 2, 3, 4, or whatever else that we work on.
Okay, great. Thank you, Arthur. So you might, this is Catherine, you might propose maybe that we do a little more research first, maybe some kind of surveys of the community as possibly, I'm just making suggestions. We've done that kind of thing in the past.
I think those are good ideas, and if the survey doesn't prove fruitful, maybe we'll need to do a hearing associated with it. I think we have to do a little homework ourselves. Allie mentioned that digging a little deeper on this, giving some examples associated with that, those exploratory things. I think Chloe, when she was doing that for West Chatham, that was extremely helpful in understanding the implications associated with some of the proposals on that. And I think we as a board, as well as I think the community, could understand whether this is a supportable item once we start doing some of that. So maybe that's a good suggestion, Catherine, that we do a little bit of due diligence, and then perhaps a survey. If the survey doesn't work, then maybe we can do a public meeting asking specific input for this or that. Thank you.
Yeah, community forums, maybe something like that. And again, this is Catherine, just a general comment. I think the board, to me, you've indicated your willingness to attend to this need. I mean, we all know that there is, as I think Mr. Gagan said, a housing emergency. And we want to attend to this need in order to serve the needs of the town, but also it is important as a board that we work for the town, and ultimately it is up to the citizens of this town to vote for something or not to vote for it. And we need to serve the citizens of this town. So we do need to, I think, Arthur, it's also a good point. We need to understand what the citizens of the town want. We need to do both things. All right, so Tom Gagan, with your comments on point 3 in particular, apartments incidental to commercial or industrial use.
Yes, Catherine, I think that your point that you and Arthur are ping-ponging back and forth is a very serious one. And I have no major issues with number 3. I think that any one building being limited to 4 apartments per building, excuse me, makes sense. My assumption is, and I don't know if this is correct, but my assumption is that general business lots and industrial lots are not huge pieces of land, unless someone can clarify that for me. What I'd like to see us look into is the data that supports reducing 10,000 square feet for each apartment to 5,000 square feet for each apartment. That might give us a number of the potential apartments that we could create in these 2 zones. If it turns out to be 300 apartments, that's going to meet with a lot of resistance. It turns out to be 10 or 15 apartments. It's getting to be more pliable with the community that we support. So part of the data I'd like to see generated is reducing the square foot requirement for each apartment. And I'm going to just throw out a number of from 10,000 to 5,000. How many additional apartments would that allow versus how many apartments are allowed or potentially allowed with 10,000 square feet per apartment? That might give us a handle on a number about density and kind of be upfront with people saying that, this is what it's really going to be if it was potentially built out, and it's not going to be this boondoggle of, mega number of apartments. So that fear has to be quelled, and I think both you and Arthur are correct in doing our due diligence to be able to have answers to these questions.
Great, thank you, Tom. And Warren, comments specifically on point 3.
Certainly, I'd agree with Tom's assessment, but also just to sensitize the community, or to be aware that the community will be sensitive to their perception of our draft bylaw for the neighborhood centers, which talks about 10,000 square foot lots and talks about density that is quite significantly greater than what may be there now. And I don't think that other bylaw changes can be looked at independently from each other. I think that there's a significant sense in the community against increased density, and I certainly wouldn't want the neighborhood center draft to go down in flames because it is viewed as yet one more leaf on the tree of increased density no matter where you look. In this case, it would be under the residential and commercial industrial use, blah, blah, blah. So we need to somehow or other make sure that we don't paint a picture which is viewed as density everywhere, here, and here, in multiple different parts of the bylaws, and therefore none of it's any good. So no to everything, including the neighborhood center bylaw. That's the only comment I have. I'm in favor of trying to look at this as well.
Okay, great. Thank you, Warren. Bob Wirtschafter, regarding point 3, revisions to the apartments incidental to a commercial or industrial use.
Yeah, I think the points have been well made, that density is the issue, that we need to tread carefully on that and put together something that is not scary, not too scary for enough people. But I think we can do that now that if we're looking at 50%, I think it's a much more reasonable objective than it would be if it was 2/3. So I'm encouraged to try.
Great, thank you. And this is Catherine. I'll just make this comment. It just occurred to me while everyone was talking that we may, from a practical standpoint, choose as a board to work on a couple of these as a priority, along with West Chatham, something like that, set our priorities in that way. But I think because density is an issue in town, we also do need to look at everything all of a piece. How does it all work together? And we need to probably, I think it's good to have clear information that we can give to everyone, give to the citizens of the town, try to craft a whole picture synergistically that will allows for some increased opportunities for diversity of housing options, but still be able to clearly answer questions. What will this mean in terms of the overall density? What will the results be? And if we can craft it in such a way that the density is still under control within certain limits, but it does allow for a certain amount of increased flexibility, perhaps in the opportunities to create units. We just need to have very clear information, and I think we do need to look at it as a whole, because I think everyone is right in citing that the increased density will be of concern. So that's just my comment. And if we can go to, let's see, I guess Bob Dubus is next on point number 3.
This is Bob Dubus. Listen, I'm going to have to address 3, 4, and 5 a little bit. What I'm going to say goes to each one of these.
All right, go ahead.
Now, if you all know, if you drive around town, there are 5,000 square foot lots in town, and they've turned out rather well. And until the big scare years and years and years ago, where they oversized the lots, I can see them returning in certain areas, and those areas are going to have to be the areas that have sewer running by them. I don't believe that people are going to make you put a 5,000 square foot lot in a place when our regulations for septic and stuff is 10,000 square foot per bedroom. So that's going to be one hurdle to override. But if they do have sewer in front of them, then there really is no harm in putting a building, 2 or 3 bedroom building, on a 5,000 square foot lot if done tastefully, because we're not going to put any more nitrification into the ground, which is what you're going to come up against. So I just think that the idea is a good idea for moderate income housing. Let's leave it at that. And on a 5,000 square foot lot, a house is a house. As long as you take care of the water and sewer problem, I don't see anything that's going to stop that other than you might have to put a limitation, a yearly limitation on some of that building to see how it works, like we did with the ADU, and revise it in 2 years. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you, Bob. And let's see. I do see a couple of hands raised. I think Rick Levitt, you had your hand up, and then after you, Tom Gagan.
Thank you, Catherine. This is Rick Levitt. Ally, could you put up my graphic, please?
Of course, give me just 1 second.
Thank you, Ally. The discussion tonight is clearly the density issue, and people are afraid of it. But Bob, you just made a very good point. There are, Ally, could you scroll it down a little, see the upper right? Those are homes on Shattuck Lane in downtown Chatham. They're on 3,000 to 5,000 square foot lots, and there are lots of them in the downtown area and in the old village. We do not need to be afraid of density. You're absolutely right. You need to explain it carefully to people. In the upper left is what they think is coming in the way of density. It's not coming, and you're not even close to proposing anything like that. And now, Ellie, can I see the bottom pictures? These are density. This is the good kind of density that I just described in downtown. And it's been traditional in this town to have in concentrated areas like the village centers, higher density where working people can afford to live. They cannot afford to live any longer in the downtown area, but they certainly can afford to live in the West Chatham area and in other village centers around Chatham. So I look forward to the January 24th, the next town meeting, and I will go into much more detail on how this can be achieved. But I really applaud your discussion tonight. You're really focused on what is needed. Certainly the village center work that you're doing for West Chatham is absolutely crucial. Stay focused. Don't be worried about the people who are scared of density. We can deal with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rick. So let's move on in our discussions to point number 4. We'll continue discussing as a board, and this is for
Madam Chair?
yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I did have my hand raised, please.
Okay, sorry about that. Please go ahead.
To speak to Bob Dubus's comments, if you reduce the lot size, and again, just picking a number, 5,000 square feet, there's no reason why, in terms of the people who are going to be quite concerned, perhaps overly concerned about density, that a house built on a 5,000 square foot lot couldn't have a restriction of 2 bedrooms. I mean, there's all kinds of things we could do creatively to get smaller lots built on, but not worry about 3 or 4 bedrooms or the absurd statements which are going to come out against such a plan. Again, we're looking, at least I know I am, and I think other board members are looking for justification for small incremental baby steps to start making progress towards the end amount. And that's what's crucial, that we come up with some creativity. I have some data to back up what we're talking about. How many 5,000 square foot lots are there? How many of the lots which are currently now on 5,000 square feet or less, how many bedrooms do they contain on an average? And have that data available for those who are going to be concerned about that issue.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Really good suggestions. Thank you. So let's move on to the board's discussion and consideration of point 4, revisions to the multifamily zoning. Currently allowed only in the general business 1 zone, which is downtown, residential 20A zone, Frostfish Hill and Misty Meadow Lane, and in the remaining flexible overlay development districts. The zoning bylaw requires that the development cannot contain more than 8 bedrooms per acre of contiguous buildable upland, as well as several other criteria, such as specific buffers, setbacks, street frontages, lot coverage, etc. So Art Sprue, your thoughts on this suggestion?
Thank you, Catherine. This one has some other specific things that certainly would be worth looking into. I mean, we did that with the West Chatham zoning. Certainly, if you're going to be looking at this type of increased density, have to revisit buffers, setbacks, street frontages, lot coverages, all of that. So I think the two go hand in hand. Once you've defined and you get support that says it's X, then you take a look at the subsequent things, and they all seem, you would need to line them up to make sure that they're going to be supportable associated with it. It won't do any good, as Allie had mentioned before on item 1, if you don't have flexibility and adjustment of your dimensional thing and you're increasing the density, it's you know, one is never going to support the other. So this makes sense that we would have to do both in this case, and maybe even some of the others. I do want to go back to what Bob Dubus has said. I think one of the things that he brought up is very important, associated with making sure that whatever we do here is going to be supportable from infrastructure standpoint. As a civil engineer, if you don't have the infrastructure to support providing drinking water and providing wastewater, then you're going to have limitations. Now, this is something that probably working through the DPW or whoever has been doing our development here could probably give us some information associated. Do we have the flexibility to say increase the density to in 4 different areas of town? And is it supportable from a wastewater perspective and a drinking water perspective? We have all sorts of questions that everybody's been thrown into the mix about our drinking water right now and what we have to do in order to make that healthy. So, and from a wastewater perspective, residential development is the highest use that we have. So that puts the biggest burden on our infrastructure. So again, that needs to go hand in hand with this. We would need to have that information to help us understand whether there are limitations. There could be some in some areas of the town, in other areas, there could be flexibility. So that would help us too, and understand which of these would be appropriate for us to actually extend further and look into further from an increased density standpoint. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Arthur. Very much appreciate your comments. So Tom Gagan, some additional comments on point 4, revisions to multifamily zoning?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. Arthur's quite correct, and he's also correct, probably knowing this data as an engineer, that it requires 110 gallons per day per bedroom. And what I'd like to see, again, with my general theme tonight, is the possibility of looking into another incremental change in that we go from 8 bedrooms to 10. That's 220 gallons per day. And as Arthur has pointed out, are there areas appropriate for that additional flow? And how would that affect both the infrastructure of a septic system versus an area where there's a flow from our sewers? So if there's an area where we have sewer capacity and we were to request an increase from 8 to 10 units, apartments, bedroom, 8 to 10 bedrooms per acre in those areas that would have the ability for capacity, additional capacity. That's data that we should have to discuss, because there is going to be some issues about our general infrastructure, not only sewer and water, as Art has pointed out, but services and roads and there's a whole plethora of things that are going to come up against this board in terms of those who don't want to see anything changed in town. So the preparation for that would be, what would be the argument to go from 8 to 10 bedrooms per acre in this particular area, multifamily zoning? And should that only be allowed in areas where we know the infrastructure, specifically sewer capacity, would allow for that? Very small, very incremental, and not town-wide.
Thank you, Tom. Great. Very much appreciate your comments. Warren Chain.
I don't think I have anything to add to what's already been said. I'm certainly in favor of looking at this particular paragraph as well in context of the others. But I do think it's very important that we make certain that whatever we come up with can be supported by the infrastructure, water and sewer in particular, but and also have some idea of whatever change we might make. What would it mean? How many pieces of property are out there? How much would you reasonably expect to increase the number of units by? Because if it's a de minimis kind of a number, then it's perhaps important that you know that up front, to, as opposed to keeping it wide open to, oh, look what you're doing, more density. I think the idea has to always be, how do we sell this? And getting more information about data, that it's not a strain on the infrastructure, and it's and a measurable number of additional units that would result from whatever we propose. But that's all I would say.
Great. Thank you, Warren. Bob Wirtschafter.
Yeah, I sort of hear this concern about density from and people are invoking the environmental concerns they have. And I made a presentation to the select board 3 weeks ago from on behalf of the Energy and Climate Action Committee, in which I noted a new Cape Cod report in which the cost of just the sea rise to the Cape is $50 billion over the next 70 years. And that's likely to be $3 billion in Chatham. So I am the first one to be concerned about environment, but I think there's a false sense of crying environment when we restrict people from living where they work and force them to get in a car and drive to 2 hours or 3 hours and then live somewhere else and put the density in those areas. So I'm all for being concerned about the environmental effects of all this, but I think we have to be equitable in terms of what we're imposing on our community by living here and expecting to have people working here, but not willing to let them live here. I just want to make sure that we keep that in perspective, that sustainable is not limiting people living here. That's not a sustainable approach. And I appreciate you guys listening to that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bob. And Bob Dubus, do you have any more comments on the multifamily zoning?
No, I think Bob Dubus is pretty well spent out right at the moment.
Okay.
I can only say so much, and I think that I come up with a few good ideas, and that'll be it for now.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
All right. So let's move on to point 5, small lot zoning. There are parcels of vacant land that at this time cannot be developed because they do not meet the dimensional requirements of the zoning bylaw, such as minimum lot size, as well as front, rear, and side yard requirements. It is likely that many of these parcels could be suitably developed as housing. Smaller lots could encourage the construction of smaller homes under appropriate guidelines to provide some housing options that are not currently being created by the private market, such as starter homes or homes for empty nesters interested in reducing their living space and home maintenance requirements. An example is given of a bylaw that was approved in the town of Dennis to allow affordable lots. I won't go through all those details. There's also another model from the Nantucket Housing Needs Covenant Program, which allows a property owner with more than one residential dwelling on a parcel to sell one of those dwellings at a permanently affordable price. So anyway, so some examples are offered from other communities on the Cape, Nantucket and Dennis, that have adopted something to this effect. Let's go through comments. I know, Arthur, you've already commented that you feel this is quite a difficult idea, but let's hear from you again.
Well, actually, Warren had a good suggestion here associated with making an assessment of how many of these would be occurring. And if it doesn't look like there is a significant number, then this is a non-issue. So I think Warren hit it right on. And if you combine that with the examples, some that Rick Levitt had brought up, that makes sense. Combine the two together that says, here is the quantity, here's the areas of where the focus would be, and here's the type that we would be proposing to do. And if you marry those two together, now all of a sudden you might have a win-win. So I think a lot of discussion that we've been having makes sense in here. And just not to discount anything that Bob Wirtschafter had said, like it or not, the town has a lot invested in its infrastructure. It's got a $300 million sewer program. If it's insufficient to support a different level of density, then that's something, and same on the water side, that's a reality, all right? How much more money are you gonna put in it? It's not you gotta remember, our wastewater program was not a 5-year program. It was a 20-year or a 30-year program. So you can't go back to start and say, oh, okay, we're going to redo it all because we're going to increase the density by X amount. I think we have to live within the confines of what reality brings to the mix. And that helps put some boundaries on things. Not to say that you don't want to do it, you just have to understand it and make sure that we're not outside the bounds of what our infrastructure plans are for the future. Now, if we decide that we're not going to develop in one area and have higher density in the other area with affordable housing, that's all fine. Now you balance things out. So all things like that need to be put into the mix. It's like you have a bubble here. If you push here and it pops out here, it doesn't help at all. So I think we've talked about this before about having a bigger picture. You got to look at the big picture on this thing. And you can't just do one thing without and ignore all the rest. You have to look at all the pieces and make sure they're supporting each other. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Arthur. Tom Gagan, comments specifically on point 5, creation of small lot zoning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Keep beating this dead horse, but I think incrementally, what Arthur's pointing out and others on the board are pointing out is the quid pro quo, and that is that the size, my take on this, is the size of the lot, a buildable lot, has to be predicated on the appropriate infrastructure. And what I'm saying is that if it was a 3,000 square foot lot, you could have 1 bedroom. If it was a 5,000 square foot lot, you could have 2 bedrooms. Some different number than 10,000 square feet to accommodate some building on smaller lots if the infrastructure, sewer and water would support it. But to be rigid that you need 10,000 square feet and you only want to build a one-bedroom home because you're retiring or whatever you wish to do with it, I think there should be some flexibility there.
Okay, great. Great thoughts. Thank you, Tom. Warren, any additional points on point 5 specifically?
Try not just to be redundant, but I do think that there's a great deal, there are many more options that can go into number 5 than perhaps in some of the other paragraphs. In terms of what could be done, in terms of size of lots, number of bedrooms, et cetera, et cetera. Recognize, I think, that if we're trying to encourage young families to be able to stay here so we can have an elementary school, then we don't want to build lots of one-bedroom houses or apartments. Not going to get us there, even if they're affordable. It's also true that that any of the specifics that are in here that are being talked about as possibilities might work just fine. But again, before anybody took it seriously, I think you'd want to know how many lots are involved here. How many bedrooms might end up being built theoretically, and have answers to the questions. Can the infrastructure support it? Because if it can, it can. If it can't, well, then that's something you need to know before you go forward with it. I think that it's also, well, not relevant to whether it's a good idea. It does seem to me that if you happen to be the person who has owns a lot next to theirs that is not buildable, you're paying some taxes on that, and then all of a sudden you get a tremendous Christmas present here, where all of a sudden you can build a house and sell it. So there's going to be a small minority of people, I don't know how many, who are going to be very much in favor of this. I don't know what, I think that's the luck of the draw. Sometimes things happen that are happy for you, and other times not. But I think I'd at least want to know how many people are likely to have an unexpected Christmas present if, in fact, they turn an unbuildable lot that they happen to own into one that's buildable. There'll be no shortage of people looking to build on it, that's for sure. But again, yeah, I think there are a lot of different options. There are more options available for consideration in 6 than in the others, which just makes it more important to know how many potential homes or units could be accommodated in Chatham, according to whatever options you try and pick there.
Okay.
But that's all.
Great. Great. Thank you, Warren. And Bob Wirtschafter on small lot zoning.
Yeah, I'm pretty well spoken out here. I will acknowledge Art is correct that the infrastructure is has limits. I think the town is going to have to be making some very serious decisions about its future that will make for a lot of infrastructure changes. So I'm not discounting what you're saying, Art. I just think there's a level of inequity in allowing somebody to build a 6,000 square foot house without worrying about density and then screaming when we want to put a couple little small units somewhere. So I think there has to be balance here.
Great. Thank you. And I see a lot of agreement from other board members with that sentiment. So I'm just going to ask Rick Levitt, I still see your hand up. Is that from before? I just want to.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
No worries.
I will look forward to your January 24th, your next meeting, and we'll discuss more extensively about the density in West Chatham, and I look forward to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rick. So this is Catherine. I just want to give a little bit of a reply to what I've been hearing from the board members. I think what I'm hearing, and I think there's really very intelligent consideration of these, that there's a lot to deal with here. We, as always, it's a balance. We have to find a balance. There's a need for creating more opportunities for affordable and attainable housing. So there's a great need. It's a crisis. Tom has said it's an emergency. But at the same time, we have to balance that with considerations of infrastructure and considerations of the overall increase in density in Chatham, that for many citizens in Chatham would be a concern. So Tom has mentioned this idea of taking baby steps, of moving incrementally. I think I've been hearing from a number of you that whatever we do, we need to look at the facts. We need to look at the data. We need to really understand what the effect will be. If there is an increase in density, what I'm hearing also, we need to allow a certain increase, but also put in measures that control it. So it's not out of control. So it doesn't reach a point where it is in excess of what is acceptable to the citizens of this town or in excess of what our infrastructure can handle. So I just see that there's a fair amount of work and research that needs to be done to act on any of these. I also think, and I'm not quite sure how we're going to handle this, I might ask Ally for her thoughts, that we do need to look synergistically. We need to look at, how all of this is going to work together, because we need to consider overall how it's going to affect the town overall. I think one of the concerns that people have, the way people regard density, is similar to the kind of fear that people have about what was called sprawl, that it's a kind of creeping thing, that it creeps up, that it's a little bit here, a little bit there, and all of a sudden you've got this very, very unwanted situation where there's too much and that it's kind of creeping. So I think we need to take a look at the whole picture and look at it as a situation where there's some controlled and clearly understood increase in what we call density in certain areas, in certain ways that are manageable and sustainable in terms of infrastructure and are acceptable to the town. So, but still fulfill that need. As Bob Bortschafter is pointing out, there is a great need, and Tom's pointing out a great need to increase the diversity of housing options. And there is that, it is a very real situation that to have people commuting from Plymouth, even from off Cape or other areas of the Cape to come to Chatham to work, as an ecologically sustainable practice, it's not. It's kind of an illusion that really works. It doesn't really work if we consider we're looking at the long-term future of this community as well as the Cape as a whole, as well as our state and community as a whole. So I think those are really good points. I'm not really sure how to proceed with this. Ali and I discussed some options. We may, in the past, we found it useful to take smaller bites and present those to the public and annual town meeting. I do think in this case, though, there is some consideration that we have to give to the whole effect on everything we're doing. I'm going to suggest, and I'll just suggest this, I want to hear what Ali has to say, that taking something like the accessory dwelling unit bylaw that we've already worked extensively on, we have a lot of research, we know what the effect was of what we've already done. We have some ideas of certain changes that we could make that are clearly, we might be able to clearly assess and present to the public, that we might say that we could start with that one, and maybe point one, the affordable dwelling units mandatory bylaw, that again, I think we have some easily accessible data and some ideas that might be easily put forth and easily implemented. So I would suggest that, but I do want to hear what Ali has to say about a possible approach in terms of a plan of action.
Thank you, Catherine. So yeah, as you had said, I think that, one of the ones that is more easily done, I would say, just because we do have a lot of data and we have worked extensively on it, is revisions to the ADU bylaw. And I just want to kind of hear what the board thinks about if we feel that we could potentially get it, the revisions to this upcoming town meeting. I do hear what you all had said about having more a holistic approach to all of these 5 potential revisions. And I think that maybe 4 of them, number 1, number 3, number 4, number 5, could come at a different time and we could discuss them all together with much research to be done there. But I do feel like the accessory dwelling unit bylaw, we might be able to get some revisions done in a quicker time frame than the other 4. So I just wanted to hear kind of what the board's thoughts are going forward. If you do want me to prepare some information for you for this next meeting on January 24th, so we can kind of get moving on that, or if you did want to wait and take more time to bring that to town meeting potentially as well. So I just wanted to hear the thoughts of the board on that.
Great. So Arthur, do you have a response
Thank
for
you.
Ellie?
Yes, 1 and 2, yes, that makes sense. 3, 4, and 5, they go together. You're right. The due diligence overlaps on those, so it makes sense. So I'm good with this.
Okay, great. And Ellie, were you saying just number 2, or were you saying 1 and 2 maybe we could work on?
I think number 2, which is the ADU, we have a lot of information on it, and we've, had a lot of research done on it. So I think that one I could bring together very, fairly quickly to you. Number 1 would take just probably a little bit longer to get all the research done. So that was kind of my thought process. If I was to put together a staff report for this upcoming meeting, just what, information I could pull together for the board in time.
Okay, great. All right, but we're looking at point 1 and point 2 as possible points to act on first, with point 2 maybe being, something we could even look at our next meeting. Okay. So how about Tom Gagan, comments on potential plan of action here?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tom Gagan. I agree with Arthur. I agree with Ally. We need to devote some time to these baby steps. And if we can work on the ADU, that would be helpful. I hope at this meeting, and I won't be long, that there was another document in your packet that I'd like to speak to. I won't do it now, but it also, from one of the members' perspective, talks about ADU and supportive measures, particularly around financing. So I think if we start with the ADU, and if there's time for a brief discussion on this document that was put into your packet, that might be helpful to focus on that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tom. So Warren, your comments on this potential plan of action?
Well, I'm all for the mini steps, but at the same time, I like to step back and say, gee, what's the big picture here? And it does seem that if market density is the gorilla in the room, there might be a way with reasonably little spade work to come up with an order of magnitude of the number of housing units that could potentially result from increasing the allowable density according to our paragraphs 1 through 5 over the next 20 some odd years. And at the same time, that would be offset against the reduction in density that is likely to occur or that has been mandated by taking most of West Chatham and rezoning it to residential from commercial. And therefore, somehow or other, in a holistic sense, saying all of these things that we're talking about might have a net effect of X or X% on the density in the town. We're pushing it around a bit, But the idea that you could somehow or other sell it to people by showing that overall this has an impact which is very acceptable and achieves the objectives that have been approved by the.
Great, great. Thank you, Warren. Bob Wirtschafter, I know you said you've talked out, but just your comments on this plan of action of maybe looking at point 2 first, and then after that, point 1, and then later considering 3, 4, and 5.
I think that makes sense, and I think perhaps a vote at town meeting on maybe not as a bylaw, but just sort of a sense of the meeting of how, whether 100 more units or 50 more units is over the next 10 years, or some goal that we can establish. We could do it at town meeting. I like the poll idea that was with the Cape Cod Commission, but somehow getting some agreement in town as to what's an acceptable number of affordable housing units and how we would cap it so it wouldn't, be more than that. And that would help. I think that would help us figure out what priorities are for changing some of these things, and give us some direction. So 1 and 2 now, and work on the density issue as a public relations matter.
Okay, thank you, Bob. And I know, Bob Dubus, you said you're talked out, but I'm just going to ask you what you feel about the proposed plan of action.
I believe that's probably the way to go. I think 2 would be the easier of the 5 in there to come across and come up with some ideas off, and then 1 follow it with 1. I think that's a smarter idea.
Okay, great. All right. So, Tom, I know you've been referring to the article from the Cape Cod Times. Did you want to take a few moments to discuss that?
I would, Madam Chair, but is it appropriate that the other members of the board speak to it? I have some outline, and I know it's getting kind of late. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but it does feed into what I think the board is in agreement with now, speaking as a priority for the ADUs. And that's why I'd like to spend maybe a few minutes talking about what this article talks about in terms of funding. I have some suggestions, but I'd like to hear from the other board members also, please.
Okay. I just want to check in with Ally, just to make sure that we have enough input from the board now regarding our plan of action going forward. And if you're comfortable with that and we're all set, if I can just check in with Ally about that, or do I need to revisit anything? Ally? I think you're muted. Well, I think we're clear. I'll just double check with Ally. I think we're clear about our plan of action going forward. So Tom, did you want to hear comments from board members before you made a few points about this? And
Can I?
Yes.
Yeah. Madam Chairman, I would like to move that this be part of the discussion of the ADUs in next meeting, and that we move for adjournment, because I think there's a lot that Tom wants to say, and I think we all want to discuss it, but to give it the discussion is due would require at least another half an hour.
Okay.
Madam Chair, Tom Gagan.
Yes, please go
I
ahead.
agree with Bob. He's already beat me in 3 arm wrestling matches. So if he believes that that's appropriate, I have no.
With the right hand too, Tom. I'm beating you with my right.
Bob, I'm ambidextrous and I use my left hand a lot.
Okay.
I have no issues, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Hey, I wouldn't admit to using the left hand a lot.
Okay, Tom, as long as you're okay with it, I think it's appropriate to discuss it when we discuss the ADU, and we have committed to discuss the ADU next meeting. And we also, as you know, we'll be discussing the West Chatham Neighborhood Center as well as the ADU bylaw next meeting. So why
Madam
don't
Chair?
we?
Tom
Yes.
Gagan, I want to usurp Bob Dubus's place at making a motion.
Well,
I already
do
did.
need
I already made the motion.
Mr. Gagan, I need to.
No, adjournment, Bob.
Gagan,
That's the one I made.
both of you. I do need to interrupt just as a matter of formality. I do need to just check if there's anyone from the public, non-board member who would like to make a comment, who has not yet had the opportunity to do so. I just want to recognize anyone from the public before we move to adjournment. I don't see any hand raised, no hands raised. So now please go ahead, who would ever.
Bob
like to
Duba
make a
should
motion.
do it. Go ahead, Bob.
I move to adjourn. Thank you.
All right, so we have a motion. May I
I
have a second?
second.
I third.
Let's do our roll call vote. Art Spru,
Art Sprue, approve.
Tom Gagan.
Ditto.
All right, Warren Chain,
Warren Chain approved.
Bob Wirtschafter,
Bob Wirtschafter approve.
Bob Dubus.
Bob Dubus, approve.
And this is Catherine Halpern. I also approve that we adjourn this meeting. Let's note the time as 7:37 p.m. And thank you, everybody, for your participation. Very much appreciated. It was rather long, but I think very fruitful. And please enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you, everybody.